Hello and welcome to News Blitzer. Before Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the US on February 12, 2025, for talks with President Donald Trump, the domestic Indian media painted high expectations from the visit. But in reality, what unfolded was a setback for India, even though the media is doing its best to portray it in good light. Was this a win-win negotiation or an absolute submission to US pressure? Let's break it down. Here are 6 key reasons why this meeting ended with India on the losing side. Reason number 6. Legitimizing suppression of press freedoms. A journalist from the Associated Press was barred from the joint press conference held by the two leaders on February 14, a clear attack on press freedom. The journalist was reportedly barred for AP's style decision to stick with the name Gulf of Mexico for the body of water that the president rechristened the Gulf of America. Such suppression of journalists is part of a broader trend under Modi's leadership, where dissenting voices are silenced through sedition laws and defamation cases. India ranks 161 out of 180 countries in the 2023 World Press Freedom Index, a steep decline from previous years. By excluding the AP journalist, the trend was not only affirmed but suppression of press freedom seems to have been legitimized by the Trump administration at the expense of free press and freedom of speech in India, which is a burning issue. More importantly, India can no more expect US to stand up for the suppression of the press by the Modi regime, which suits the regime well. Reason number 5. US interests took precedence over human rights. Unlike previous administrations that emphasized values-based diplomacy, this meeting completely ignored human rights concerns. India has been criticized by global organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch for increasing restrictions on press freedom, religious intolerance, and treatment of minorities. Reports indicate that over 300 journalists have faced harassment or legal action in India over the past 5 years. Further, the U.S. State Department's own 2023 Human Rights Report flagged India for wrongful detentions and attacks on religious minorities, among other human rights violations. Trump's America First policy made it clear, economic deals matter more than human rights. But what does this mean for India's global image? India is already criticized worldwide for its deviation from democratic principles in various aspects of the polity, economy and society. With Trump himself being in the same bandwagon, the human rights violations by the Modi regime will continue unabated, while the US, which prides itself on being a free country, will watch it all from the sidelines as long as it does not disrupt American interests. Reason number 4. Humiliation of Indian nationals and protection of diaspora. Prime Minister Modi agreed to repatriate thousands of undocumented Indian immigrants living in the US. But at what cost? There are an estimated 5 lakh illegal Indians in the US, many of whom have built lives there for decades. A sudden influx of deportees would worsen India's unemployment crisis, with the jobless rate already hovering around 7.5% as per CME, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. Unemployment in the country is now at levels unprecedented since independence. Unlike Mexico, which has negotiated protections for its undocumented immigrants, India failed to secure any safeguard measures for its citizens. Did Modi negotiate any protections for Indian immigrants? No. Instead, he aligned with Trump's strict immigration agenda, leaving the Indian diaspora in the lurch. And while the talks were going on, the second batch of illegal Indians in the US were once again chained and shackled on their way to India. The humiliation of Indians continues. The same shackling was not seen in deportees from Colombia, which sent its own aircraft to bring back the deportees in dignity. Reason number 3. Lack of progress on trade disputes. Despite all the talk, there was no real progress on key trade disputes that have been festering between the two countries since long. The US revoked India's Generalized System of Preferences, GSP, in 2019, affecting over $6 billion worth of Indian exports. Modi failed to restore it. India sought its reinstatement, but negotiations under Trump failed to restore the benefits, impacting Indian exporters and other businesses. For instance, India is a major supplier of generic drugs to the US, but regulatory hurdles and pricing policies created barriers. Likewise, the US also tightened visa rules for H-1B workers, affecting India's $150 billion IT industry, which heavily relies on skilled worker movement. In addition, the US opposes India's data localization laws requiring companies like Amazon and Google to store data within India. India, on the other hand, sought stricter e-commerce regulations to protect domestic retailers from foreign competition. Similarly, H-1B visa restrictions continue to hurt India's $150 billion IT sector, with companies like Infosys and TCS struggling to send skilled workers to the United States. There is nothing could do about any of these issues. Reason number 2. Jeopardizing national security and defense ties. Trump pushed India to buy expensive outdated US weapons, including F-35 jets, but is this really in India's best interest? Already, the US has sanctioned countries buying military equipment from Russia, India's traditional defense partner. Over-reliance on American arms jeopardizes India's strategic autonomy and relations with Russia, given that India imports over 60% of its military equipment from Russia. India also does not have the finances for such purchases, which serve American interests more than India's. The question remains, is India's defense policy being dictated by Washington? Is India going to pawn its long defense associations with other countries to please US policies? After all, the US worked against India in the 1971 war with Pakistan, while the erstwhile Soviet Union with Russia at its core came to India's help and kept the US out of the war. Reason number 1. Escalation of trade tensions, possible trade war. Trump slammed India's high tariffs on American goods, calling them unfair, and in response, announced plans for reciprocal tariffs on Indian imports. This means a potential trade war that could hurt businesses on both sides. With over $190 billion in bilateral trade, a standoff could cost jobs, investment, and economic growth for India. The US has been particularly critical of India's price controls on medical devices, which has hurt American manufacturers like Abbott and Medtronic. Modi made no breakthrough in resolving these disputes, and India walked away with nothing concrete. On the ground, this has effectively set the stage for a blistering trade war if the Modi regime shows spine and decides to assert itself at a later stage. The only beneficiary from Modi's visit is the US, with Prime Minister Modi bending backwards and agreeing to the terms unilaterally set out by Trump, even reducing tariff on certain imports from the US to placate Trump before the meet. Therefore, while Modi's visit was projected as a step forward in Indo-US relations, the reality tells a different story. As a result, India walked away empty-handed, while the US dictated terms. What are your thoughts? Do you think India got a fair deal, or was it a diplomatic misstep? We'd love to hear from you. Share your views in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to News Blitzer for sharp analysis and unfiltered reporting. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more insightful reports.